Anyone who's ever watched a Warriors game or has seen Steph Curry play has most likely asked himself two questions. How the does he shoot that good, and where did he learn to shoot like that? And luckily today I found out the answer to both of those questions, so that's what we're going to be looking at. And to get started with that, we got to look back to before he was even born. If you know anything about Steph Curry, then you know his dad was one of the great shooters in NBA history. He was a career 40% three-point shooter, and he could light it up from anywhere on the floor. So on March 14th, 1988, Steph Curry was born with the genetics of a deadly three-point shooter. And it's crazy to think that there could be genetics for being able to shoot a piece of rubber into a hoop, but the Curry family proves it to be true. So right off the bat, Steph has had an advantage at shooting the basketball. And another advantage he had early on was that a lot of his childhood was spent at NBA games, hanging out and shooting with future Hall of Famers. He got to go to Dell's practices and games, but for the most part he'd never do it alone because his younger brother Seth Curry was with him. So on the professional NBA practice courts, the two of them played games almost every day. And if it wasn't there, then it was in their backyard. All that and the fact that he had an NBA player teach him how to play the game of basketball was what gave him such a huge head start. By the time he was in 8th grade, he was undersized, but he was a great player and he led his team to an undefeated season, including a game where his team beat a high school team at one point. And then he'd enter the 9th grade. As a freshman, he was 5'7" and 130 pounds. And even with all the advantages and the skill that Curry had as a kid, he wasn't the same standout in high school right away. His shot was so low that he'd release the ball from his chest, kind of like Lonzo, but not as ugly. And then that, combined with the fact that he was so small, he could just never get a shot off against the bigger players like he used to the point where he even said that he doubted whether he would ever play on the varsity team. So that year he played on the JV team, but he hated it. He knew he could do better, so he realized he shouldn't listen to what other people said about his height, and he should try to make the varsity team. So this is where he began to develop his deadly three-point shot. That summer after 9th grade, himself and his dad Dell retaught him how to shoot the ball to where his release point would be over his head. And if you've ever tried to teach yourself how to shoot a different way, you know how hard this could be. Steph said that he forced himself to shoot with this new form, and he couldn't efficiently shoot the ball for the next 3 weeks. He said it was so bad that he showed up to camp that summer, and people asked why he was even there. But Dell continued to help him and work out all the mechanics of the shot, and he fixed anything that he saw wrong with Steph's form. And after they got the form worked out, they worked every day on getting it to where he could catch and shoot off the dribble, coming off screens, and shoot anywhere from on the floor. And eventually, they perfected it. And they got it to where he could shoot over bigger defenders. So that led him to making the varsity team the next year. It was a huge turnaround for him because from there on out, with the help of his new shot, he'd be named an all-conference and all-state player, win 3 conference titles, and have 3 state playoff appearances. But even with that, he'd get passed on by most of the colleges he wanted to go to, including his dad Dell's alma mater, Virginia Tech, because he was undersized at the time. So instead, he went to Davidson. But just like after the 9th grade, Steph was motivated by the fact that people doubted him and said that he couldn't do it. So at this time, he was staying late after every practice, shooting until he was kicked out of the gym, and he was motivated than ever before. He'd go on to have a great college run, averaging 25 points a game. But even though he was now 6'3" and 180 pounds, scouts still didn't think he had the speed or the athleticism to keep up with the NBA point guards. And they just didn't think his offensive game would translate to the league. But after he got drafted, once again this motivated him more than ever. He was great at this point, but he was still far off from a perfect player or even a perfect shooter. So when he got to the NBA, he instantly worked every day on reflex drills with tennis balls. He used a flashing lights test that helped with his ball handling and his reflexes, did dribbling drills with 2 basketballs, and he was shooting close to 500 shots a day. He was so focused on proving people wrong, and he was slowly becoming one of the greatest shooters the game had ever seen. He was motivated to become a better player, and all the extra work and the extra shots he was putting in were starting to show. He'd shoot 500 shots a day in practice, and 100 before every single game of the season. His goal was to make his three-point shot his advantage in every game he played, and eventually he made that happen. After all of his nagging ankle injuries finally stopped, he showed what he was made of when he won his first league MVP in 2015. There's a story from that year that proves just how much Steph Curry had perfected his shot, because during the season, Brian Scalabrine, aka the GOAT, who was the Warriors' assistant coach at the time, was telling Steph about this drill that Kyle Korver does at practice, where he takes 10 shots from 5 different spots on the court, and he goes back and forth until he has 100 makes. But at the end of the conversation, Scal said something about Korver being the best spot-up shooter in the NBA, and that offended Curry. So just like after the 9th grade, in college, and in his rookie season, he used that as motivation. From that point on, he started to do that drill at every practice, and on April 15th, 2015, during that drill, Steph hit 77 3-pointers in a row and finished the 100 shots off, going 94 for 100. That's 94%. I think it's safe to say the man showed up Scal and Korver. But this just shows what kind of worker Curry is. And you might think that's where Steph Curry's journey to a perfect shot ends, but it's not. Because even after winning the MVP and shattering all kinds of 3-point records, that's never stopped him from being one of the hardest workers in the league, even though he's pretty much unanimously known as the NBA's greatest shooter of all time, and is on pace to pretty much break every remaining 3-point record there is. He still shoots close to 500 shots a day and 100 before every game. All the negativity he faced in his life, he just used it as motivation, and it's led him from having to reteach himself how to shoot to becoming the greatest shooter the game has ever seen. So this was a look at Steph Curry's journey and how he actually learned to get one of the deadliest shots in the NBA. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see where other players learn their signature moves, definitely comment down below and let me know. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.